afternoon, everyone. It is my honor and privilege to introduce our speaker. Our speaker is an assistant professor and former vice chair of the Department of History, where he has been teaching for over 3 decades, according to his bio note, which he sent to me earlier. But I really can't believe it's only been 3 decades. He's been teaching here nung wala pang LRT. just kidding. He's been teaching since 1987. Correct. Mr. Jimenez holds an AB History from De La Salle University and MA History from the University of Santo Tomas. He recently defended his dissertation at the UST Graduate School. He is a member of the Pi Gamma Mu International Honor Society in Social Sciences, Philippines Beta Chapter, and a lifetime member of the Philippine National Historical Society or PNHS, Manila Studies Association or MSA, Philippine Historical Association or PHA, and American Studies Association of the Philippines or ASAP. His research interest lies in institutional history. He has written a history of De La Salle University, 1911 to 1941, and has published articles on aspects of the institution's history covering the period 1942 to 1956. He is currently working on the history of another Lasallian institution. In the realm of oral history, he supervised an oral history project on the student life at De La Salle University, 1930 to 1945, an oral history, which was funded by De La Salle University Centennial Office and was undertaken by his historical method class from summer 2010 to summer 2012. The project was a modest contribution to the De La Salle Centennial celebration. Heeding the call of administration of the De La Salle University to engage in interdisciplinary research, he served as a co-principal investigator of the project on kahirapan at OFW phenomenon, pagdalumat sa perspektibong multidisciplinary, or poverty and OFW phenomenon, conceptualizing from the multidisciplinary perspective, University Research Coordination Office, or URCO. The project involved faculty members from 4 departments, namely Filipino, Psychology, Theology, and Religious Education, and History. He has served as an evaluator of textbooks and research projects. He has published in refereed academic journals and read papers in national and international conferences. Ladies and gentlemen, the dashing, debonair Professor Jose Victor Jimenez.
Thank you, Noy, for that kind introduction. Mr. Jose Calleja, Associate Vice Chancellor for Campus Development. Dr. Reynaldo Eleto, Distinguished Visiting Professor. Dr. Maria Florina Orillos Juan, Chair of the History Department. Dr. Fernando Santiago, Director of the Southeast Asian Research Center and Hub. Dr. Arlene De La Cruz, Vice Chair of the History Department. Dr. Noy Makapinak, the organizer of the lecture series. Friends of the library, guests, some Lasallian brothers, and fellow Lasallians, good afternoon. I'd like to convey my sincere gratitude to everyone for attending the lecture. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the History Department for providing me the opportunity to talk about this tragic episode in the history of our university. Indeed, this is a fitting tribute to the commemoration of the 75 years of heroism of the De La Salle University. We remember the lives that were lost on February 12, 1945, when the Japanese forces entered De La Salle College during the final days of World War II. And among those who perished were 16 De La Salle brothers and some civilians. It may be said that through the blood of our martyrs, the Lasallian mission thrived in the Philippines. It is hoped that this commemoration would inspire us to make our own contribution to the mission. The presentation is divided into three parts. The first part will present the humble beginnings of the De La Salle College. In the second part, I will attempt to explain how the college coped with the challenges posed by the Japanese occupation of the Philippines and the De La Salle College, and the Martyrdom at the De La Salle College. So let me begin with the discussion of the De La Salle College experience during the American colonial regime. So, you know very well this is St. John Baptist de La Salle, the founder of the Institute of the Brothers of the Christian Schools, and the brothers are drawing inspiration from the founder, of course. And then you have your Archbishop Harty. Now, the De La Salle College was founded in 1911 in response to the challenges posed by the American secular education and the stipulation of the teaching of the English language. As the leader of the Catholic hierarchy in the Archdiocese of Manila, the Venerable Archbishop Jeremiah James Harty felt obliged to champion the cause of Catholic education. Under such circumstance, he decided to seek the assistance of the Christian brothers, requesting them to open a Catholic school of high standing in which the medium of instruction would be English. Having graduated from the Christian Brothers College in St. Louis, Missouri, Archbishop Harty was confident that the Christian brothers could provide an education that could cater to the needs of the new society soon to emerge, but at the same time Christian in its orientation and philosophy. Contrary to the Lasallian tradition of educating the poor, the De La Salle College was primarily intended for the scions of the wealthy families, some of whom had already dissociated themselves from the Catholic Church. In 1904, he requested Brother Clementian, then Superior General of the Brothers of the Christian Schools, to open a school in the Philippines, but his initial request was rejected. Harty remained hopeful that this plan would be realized in due time through divine intervention. In 1909, the Archbishop wrote Brother Morelian, President of the Brothers College in St. Louis. Here are the excerpts from the letter of the Archbishop. I have ever had a reverence for the Christian brothers and his calling. I count my 6 years with them as the previous years of my youth. I have invited them to share my work here, but the conditions laid down by the power that we were prohibited. We had no money. We await the action of providence, knowing that in time the brothers will come if God so wills. We will pray to Saint Lasalle for his aid. Archbishop Harty eventually received a papal mandate in 1907 for the brothers to formally open a school in Manila. As soon as the French-born brother envoy, the immediate concern was to look for a suitable location for the campus. It was decided to acquire a 13,300 square meter property located at 652 Calle Nosaleda, later renamed General Luna Street, where the private school for the American children stood, from Doña Agustina Samanillo, Viuda de Perez Marghetti, for 70,000 pesos. So here's the site of the Lasalle School in Baco. Describing the property, Alfredo Litiato, graduated in grade school 1922, wrote, "It was more residential than scholastic." Reminiscing his grade school days, he said that it had fully shaded trees with graded lawns, an open pavilion, a fountain whose waters flowed down to an ornamental lagoon, and the main building dominated by a balcony from which flowering vines were gaily strung. The Archbishop's vision of an all-American staff of teaching brothers was brought to full fruition. First, there was a pressing need for the services of the American brothers in their own country, considering that the United States at the time was still, in a sense, missionary country with the church expanding into new territories and with a consequent demand for more brothers. Second, the American brothers themselves were experiencing difficulties as a result of the decision to suppress Latin in academies and colleges in the United States. Such a decision undermined their morale and vocation. Harty had no other recourse but to accept non-American, English-speaking brothers. 9 brothers were then recalled from their respective posts and reassigned to Philippine mission. Of this number, 5 were French, 3 were of Irish origin, and 1 was an American. And these brothers, although coming from diverse cultural background, shared a common understanding of Lasallian methodology, which at the time formed the sole basis of their pedagogical training. So here is a picture of the first batch of the founding brothers. And then you have the second batch. So you have here the first faculty of the De La Salle College, 1911. And then the first student body of 1911. Now, to address the inadequate number of teachers, faculty resources were maximized by means of assigning more classes to the brothers, particularly in 1912 and 1913. The insufficiency of teaching personnel also compelled the brothers to refuse admission of more students. One other expedient resorted to was the hiring of a lay teacher, and one of them was Juan Medrano. He was employed by Brother Asiscus Michael, having served the university until 1963. Fittingly, the university awarded him the title Teacher Emeritus. Within a few years' time, the superiors of the brothers recognized the need for more spacious grounds, envisioning a modern school facility on the new site. Brother Asiscus Michael, FSC, who assumed the directorship of the De La Salle College in 1915, played a key role in finding a more suitable location for the new campus. Brother Michael obtained 30,300 square meter land in Taft Avenue, and there were 3 considerations that governed the choice of the location. First, the property was larger than the Paco campus, thus offering great opportunities for expansion. Second, with the establishment of a school for girls, St. Scholastica's College, and for boys, De La Salle College, nearby, the parents had the option to send their children and daughters to a single area. And third, given that Pennsylvania Street, renamed Leon Ginto, was the southern end of the Tranvia streetcar line being administered by the Meralco, the students could avail of an affordable and expeditious means of conveyance to and from the area. A competition for the design of the new building was held. Of the 10 entries submitted for the competition, the one drafted by Thomas Mapua, founder of the Mapua Institute of Technology, was adjudged the best. So here is a picture of the groundbreaking ceremony, 1920. And then here is the picture of the construction of the St. Lasalle Hall at De La Salle College. Here is a facade of the De La Salle in 1925. Now, the Christian brothers exerted serious efforts to promote the spiritual growth of the students. Apart from religious instruction, certain religious rituals were adopted. The Christian life of the students was further fostered by attendance at the Holy Mass, reception of the sacraments, recitation of the Rosary, and participation in spiritual retreats. Furthermore, the young boys took part in the first Holy Communion ceremonies, which were officiated at times by the Archbishop of Manila in the school chapel. And the chapel was inaugurated on November 17, 1939. President and Mrs. Manuel L. Quezon graced the occasion. The dedication of the chapel was officiated by the Archbishop Michael O'Doherty. Here's a picture of the De La Salle kindergarten class with Mr. Juan Medrano, class teacher Mr. Juan Barrientos, and Brother William Principal. Another picture of the De La Salle Elementary First Grade, 1935, with Mr. Jose Tatco, class teacher Brother William Principal. Okay. Now, summarizing the De La Salle experience during the American period, the main rationale underlying the establishment of the De La Salle College in 1911 was the preservation of the Catholic faith. The college was primarily designed to cater to the needs of the affluent sector of society, the reason being that the public school system could very well serve the needs of the masses. The Christian Brothers, without doubt, successfully managed to cope with the challenges posed by American educational policies and other difficulties that became manifest as they embarked upon their educational work. The rapid growth of the student population of the school showed that the parents readily accepted the religious orientation of education being provided by the Christian Brothers, despite the strong secular thrust mandated by the new political dispensation in other educational institutions. So another chapter, we have the Japanese occupation of the De La Salle College. Given the urgency of the situation, the brothers warmly received the civilian refugees at De La Salle. With the continual airstrikes by the Japanese in December 1941, several civilians moved out of their houses situated in the vicinity of the school and thought it wise to live in the college, believing that its concrete building could afford them protection from the bombardment. The Redemptorists also relocated to the brothers' top property. Remember when their church and convent in Baclaran had been taken over by the Japanese military in 1944, the Irish-born superior of the congregation, Father Francis Cosgrave, unlike his other conquerors, was not interned in the camp of Los Baños. The expropriation of the houses by the Japanese in the early part of 1945 compelled the prominent families of Carlos, Yuchengco, Aquino, Vasquez Prada, and Yuchengco to seek refuge in the college. Apart from the 17 brothers, the chaplain and the refugee families, the other residents were the school employees. In all, 68 people were occupying the south wing of the college building where the bloody liberation took place in February 1945. The Japanese commanded the college for military purposes. The strategic location and massive building of the school were crucial elements in the decision of the Japanese to convert it into headquarters of the Japanese Defense Forces. And when the Japanese occupied the college, as might be expected, everything was strictly regulated. The brothers had to content themselves with the limited space allocated to them, where they were only permitted to retain the chapel, dining room, and some small rooms in the south wing. The members of the community were required to show their military pass every time they got in and left the building. Furthermore, the Japanese imposed a few other restrictions. The freedom of movement of the brothers, including the brother superior, had been curtailed. The Japanese refused to allow entry of those who attended masses on weekdays and those who supplied food and other goods for the brothers. It was likewise difficult to entertain visitors. Brother Xavier, the superior, became uncomfortable with the conditions obtaining in the college. In a meeting with Colonel Narusawa, the chief of the religious section of the Imperial Japanese Forces, held on March 7, 1942, at the brothers' conference room in the college, the brother superior brought to the attention of the official the matter concerning the restrictive policies. Although the religious section of the army could not immediately act on its concerns, it would try to ease the situation at De La Salle. However, the Japanese constrained to continue to restrain the movement of the people in the college. The brothers found themselves in financial straits. They could not withdraw their accounts from the local branch of the National City Bank of New York because the Japanese had imposed a ceiling on bank withdrawals and had placed the Americans under their control. The Japanese had no steady source of income considering that class had been suspended, and the brothers took steps to raise funds. They asked for rental payment from the Japanese for the occupation of De La Salle. The brother superior told Colonel Narusawa in the previously cited meeting that the college had not received any rent for the months of January, February, and March. The officer assured Brother Xavier that recompense would be made later. However, no payment was received from the Japanese. On April 7, 1942, the brothers began the holding of private sessions on religion, mathematics, and English. But 3 months later, they were instructed by the Office of Private Education to terminate these classes. So we could see here how enterprising the brothers were, or probably practical. Okay. With the suspension of private sessions and the shortage of funds, Brother Xavier entered into a negotiation with a local entrepreneur, George Leeton, in August 1942, and was able to secure the sum of 17,500 from him in exchange for the National City Bank check amounting to 25,000 pesos. After some time, the brothers were again saddled with financial difficulty and were thus constrained to dispose of school properties. Having practically used up the money obtained from Leeton, they sold the laboratory equipment like microscope and scales to the enterprise in buy and sell merchants. The resourcefulness of the brothers was put to a test when food became scarce in the initial phase of the Japanese occupation. To survive the ordeal, they cleared the area surrounding the South Pool and cultivated bananas and other crops such as potatoes and corn. There even came a point that because they were financially drained, they bartered the typewriters for rice and other food. The wartime exigencies rendered the De La Salle College powerless in preventing the incarceration of the brothers. Living a regimented life in the internment camp in Los Baños, the American brothers had to content themselves with limited food supply and went about their work, engaging in sports and religious activities. Life at De La Salle was peaceful several days before the liberation. Academic life at De La Salle was not hampered despite so many impositions. The brothers reopened the classes not only because their superiors had asked them to do so, but they were also motivated their concern for the young. Buoyed up by their mission to educate the young, the Christian brothers complied with the conditions imposed by the Japanese authorities and worked for the reopening of classes. The brothers were compelled by the Japanese military and space constraints to hold classes in the secondary level at St. Scholastica's College, which was under the management of the missionary Benedictine sisters. The vicissitudes of the war did not deter the brothers, who were nationals of Germany, Ireland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary, from pursuing their teaching apostolate with fervor. The lay teachers enthusiastically supported them in providing instruction in elementary and secondary level. So you have here a picture of the brothers during the Japanese period. The Japanese prescribed curriculum was implemented. Vocational training was integrated into the grade school and secondary curriculum. The secondary curriculum incorporated the study of Tagalog in only to adhere to the Nationalistic Trust of Education under the presidency of Jose Laurel. The college adopted the policy of teaching the Japanese language, assigning the subject to Horacio Sebrero. Well, of course, the Commerce program had been discontinued, presumably because it went on the strategic objectives of the Japanese military administration. The brothers ensured that the young received religious instruction. The De La Salle College saw to it that the students joined the activities sponsored by the Japanese military administration. The grade school pupils gathered at the Rizal Memorial Stadium to listen to the talk on Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. The high school students were brought to the normal school grounds to execute gymnastic exercises. And the students went on a field trip to Rizal Cell in Fort Santiago and participated in nationwide food production drive. On its own effort, of course, you have the De La Salle College spearheading activities that aim to instill nationalism among the students, such as the celebration of the National Heroes Day, Rizal Day, and National Language Week. The uncertainties of the times did not dampen the spirit of the parents to send their children to De La Salle. The school had an enrollment of 1,695 students. It may be recalled that some Ateneans, like the former Senator and Vice President Doy Laurel, attended the college. The students managed to complete their secondary education and receive their college diploma. So, let's take a look at the Greer event, the massacre. Brother Xavier decided to remain the college. This is what was said a while ago. I have a long story here. On the 1st of February 1945, a few months after Brother Xavier had received a signed note, admonishing him to abandon the school immediately, the captain of the Japanese Marine Detachment, who had jurisdiction over the college and the environs, went to De La Salle and urgently requested the brothers to vacate the premises within 2 days. The captain made such a request in light of the probability that the college would become a military target in the ensuing fight against American forces. When Brother Xavier expressed his resolve to stay in their property, the officer forewarned him, "After 48 hours, I have no more responsibility for the lives of the inhabitants of the house." The brother director retorted, "I will assume all responsibility." Before he set out, the officer instructed the brothers to restrain the members of the community from entering the areas designated for the Japanese army, specifically the hallway of the first floor and the section of the main building not in the south flank. These directives served to further reduce the movements of the people within the college. Now, the question is, why did Brother Xavier decide to stay? 3 considerations governed Brother Xavier's decision to remain. First, he believed that the thick reinforced concrete building afforded perfect shield against any direct attack. Second, Colonel Narusawa vouched that they would relinquish their control over De La Salle by the time the Japanese military authorities had closed down their hospital within the college. Third, according to Brother Andrew Gonzalez, Brother Xavier was propelled by his love for the institution and his desire to maintain it in a safe condition for the eventual resumption of classes. Brother Mutwald William was anxious about the predicament of his fellow brothers. He went to the University of Santo Tomas on the same day to seek the advice of the Archbishop of Manila, Michael O'Doherty. The Archbishop practically ordered the brothers to withdraw from the building in order to safeguard their lives, rather than remain in order to save the building or the institute. Brother William informed his religious superior of the view of the Archbishop on the matter and urged that His Grace advice would be acted upon properly. Nonetheless, Brother Xavier reiterated his stand that no one should leave the college. On February 2, Brother Director summoned the brothers to a conference. During the meeting, he emphasized the importance of remaining steadfast in their vow of obedience. Further, he enjoined the brothers to live and die together rather than leave the house and separate. After the conference, some brothers who did not find the advice of the religious superior plausible consulted the apostolic delegate Monsignor Piani, hoping that his advice would persuade Brother Xavier to reconsider his decision. However, Monsignor Piani advised them to stay at De La Salle College as the director had decided, adding that if anything happens, call on me first. And the brothers deferred to the counsel of the papal nuncio. So, searching for guerrillas and the firearms. When queried by the Japanese soldiers about the number of residents in the south wing of the building on the 6th of February, Brother Xavier informed them that there were 101 persons. But he committed an error in his reckoning, for the actual account done by Brother Maximin, who prepared and furnished the Japanese a list of the occupants, was only 68. On account of this discrepancy, the Japanese suspected that guerrillas were lurking in the college. The following day, a band of Japanese soldiers, accompanied by a well-dressed Filipino, who was presumably a Makapili, a pro-Japanese informer, came and went up the second floor, instructing all the residents to assemble and form a single line for the purpose of inspecting the place for the presence of guerrillas and the possible concealment of firearms. The bags and pockets of both men and women were checked. Nonetheless, the search yielded nothing. Subsequently, the Japanese asked for Brother Xavier and Judge Carlos, the head of the civilian refugees. After having been tagged by the Makapili as supporters of guerrilla activities, they were then hauled over to the Nippon Club and executed. The circumstances of their death remain unclear. Following the arrest of the brother director and the judge, the Japanese issued orders keeping the remaining brothers and the civilian refugees under restraint, specifically with the exception of the two servants of the Yuchengco family who could fetch water from the well. No one was allowed to go outdoors. In other respects, the residents were denied access to such places as the second level of the south wing and the verandas. Hence, they were constrained to use the stairways on the first and second floors. Father Cosgrave noted, "We were actually prisoners from the 7th at midday until we were liberated. We couldn't get out. After the arrest, the Japanese ordered that there be no exit nor entry by civilians. Violators would be shot on sight." Despite such a stern warning, one civilian dared and managed to flee on February 9, 3 days before the carnage. At the instigation of Brother Paul, FSC, Martin Hain, the college secretary, fled to a safer place. Hain took the opportunity to apprise the American officer stationed in Pandacan that several civilians were occupying the school, and consequently the bombardment of the college by the American sector was later stopped. Brother Andrew and Reyes related the circumstances in the following terms. Hain that night quietly crept out of the building, crossed the creek over the bridge at the back of the Lasalle property, and crawled through the Rizal Stadium complex. He knew that by simply heading north, he would meet with American forces. He furtively made his way to Santa Ana and succeeded in reaching the American lines. A massacre remembered February 12. The residents of the community had just taken lunch when a Japanese officer accompanied by some soldiers came in searching for snipers whom he suspected were directing their attacks at the Nippon Club, but having failed to identify any, he left. When he came back shortly, he took away 3 servants, supposedly in charges of involvement in guerrilla operations, despite the representation made by Brother Maximin, who was proficient in Nippongo, that they were not snipers, but good, dependable servants known for years. Moments later, they were brought back to the college, except for Mateo, who worked as a houseboy for the Carlos family. 2 employees of the college, Anselmo Sudlan and Pampilo Almodan, sustained serious injuries. After a couple of minutes, a group of Marines entered the premises. Then, utilizing brutal means, they indulged in an orgy of killing. Their targets were discriminate. Brother Leo, the senior brother, was seated beside Father Cosgrave, the chaplain, by the entrance of the wine cellar, was the first to be struck with a bayonet and died on the spot. Father Cosgrave was stabbed on the chest, but he survived the ordeal. Okay. 5 members of the Vasquez Prada family were passing the afternoon near the stairs when they were mercilessly attacked. Enrique, Herman, and Alfonso were the first ones to succumb to bayonet thrusts. When a Japanese soldier was about to hit her youngest son, Fernando, with a bayonet for the 3rd time, Helen Vasquez Prada grappled with assailant. Thereupon, the Japanese soldier stabbed her and mutilated her body. Fernando recounted the ordeal of her mother, who expired on February 15, when some Japanese soldiers, hearing my mother's screams, came and put an end to her life. The bayonets turned to me, finding their mark on my chest. I was wounded twice. My mother, seeing the Japanese soldier about to go for a 3rd blow, sprang up and scooped me off the floor. Like an enraged tigress, she fought back, she kicked, she bit, swung her fists. The Japanese soldiers retreated for a few seconds, but such humiliation would not be left unpunished. They had the force, the bayonets, and they came after my mother. She was lashed across the shoulders. Sorry for the graphic, of course, this is the account. A big piece of flesh was hacked out of one thigh. She tried to protect herself with her hands, but the fingers on both of her hands were sliced off. She was stabbed in the abdomen and fell to the floor. As she fell, never to rise again, Helen Vasquez Prada, only 41 years old, heard the Japanese officer say, "Let her not die now. Let her take time to die." They left her to die in this manner, to bleed till death slowly. Some Japanese soldiers even started to make a game of cutting her body into several pieces until she feels unconscious. The last one to be attacked was my father. My father was stabbed twice in the chest, but he survived this attack. As the hours passed, my poor mother lay agonizing, her entire body mutilated, the cadavers of my brothers surrounding her. I gave her water and tried to clean her wounds. My father took me to the second floor, seeking food. We found some food and my father fed me. It was while he was feeding me that a team of Japanese soldiers entered the room and attacked my father. Perceiving that Fernando would eventually die owing to the stab wounds, the Japanese did not take the trouble of inflicting further harm on him. When the Japanese went on a rampage, Ramon Yuchengco was standing with his wife by the doorway of the wine cellar, hurried to the storeroom to alert the people to the imminent jeopardy. He was unscathed, for he stayed in the cellar until nightfall, whereas her wife had been shot while absconding and expired the following morning. Upon detecting that a group of people were huddled in the cellar, the Japanese enjoined everyone. Mrs. Yuchengco was fatally wounded, and her newly baptized adopted 3-year-old son passed away, while Mrs. Yuchengco and Yonisa remained alive. The Japanese assaulted 5 other brothers and 1 more civilian in front of the cellar. Brother Bertwin was fired upon. Brother Pridebert was subjected to severe saber blows. Brother Romuald was not able to outlive the bayonet stab. Wounded, Brother Gerfried succumbed. Brother Arcadius sustained a critical wound in the heart, dying slowly and excruciatingly after 2 days. Standing in back of Brother Romuald, the servant, Yuchengco received a bayonet thrust in the left upper arm, but it was not life-threatening. Now, the Japanese unleashed their fury on the people who were rushing upstairs. Sa ground floor sila kanina, kaya takyat na. Mrs. Juanita Carlos was felled by gunfire. Her youngest son was unharmed, considering that Brother Baptista Lasalle, who was positioned behind the 2, concealed him under a mattress and shielded him from the aggressor with his own body. Brother Baptist, however, succumbed. Even if she was injured, Cecilia Carlos was following closely her mother, found her way to the chapel entrance where she expired. Felisa, one of the helpers of the Carlos family, was not seriously wounded and later took the child in the cellar. Another maid-servant of the family, Juanita, lost a finger on her left hand and was not hurt further. Akyat na tayo. The Japanese then proceeded to the second floor. At the entrance to the chapel, they found the 2 Carlos sisters and the servants. Acena's arm was nearly disjoined from her body and died during the nightfall. Having hit by a bullet that penetrated the left side of her chest and exited through her back, Rosario fell on the right flank of the chapel entrance and subsequently passed out, regaining consciousness the following day. Fortunata was stabbed with a bayonet and died on the evening. Slightly injured, Regina made it to the chapel. Unlike his brother, the 6-year-old Antonio Carlos did not survive the onslaught. Terror-stricken, emerging from the confessional box, he rushed towards Brother Mutwald and Victor FSC. When the Japanese caught up with him, he swung his bayonet at the boy. He raised him in the air with the bayonet still embedded in his body and threw him on the floor. The defenseless child died at once. Slashed with the bayonet on the ground floor, Brother Maximin ran upstairs to the second floor. Writing in 1945, Brother Antonio Fon Jesus declared that Brother Maximin came upon him near the chapel entrance, exclaiming, "It is all over with us. They're going to kill us all." Brother De Jesus further stated that both of them went inside the chapel and he nursed the bleeding arm of Brother Maximin. The other brothers joined them in the chapel. Brother Lucian, who tarried by the chapel entrance, when confronted by the frenzied Japanese soldiers, put up a fight with them and went to the extent of assaulting them, but the officer cut him up by a saber. The 2 other brothers, Lambert Romanus and Hartman Hubert, at the chapel entrance were ruthlessly attacked. So were brothers Adolf Gerjard and Paternus Paul, who hid between benches apparently for the safety. Brother Antonius was lying before the communion rail when he was stabbed several times, describing his ordeal he wrote. "Now it is my turn. Brother Maximin is lying near me on the floor. 2 Japs came upon me. They are a bit cautious. They think I have a hand grenade. I make a sign to them, indicating that I have no weapon with me. Immediately, they pounce upon me. One of the Japs gives me a stab in the chest, I fall on my back towards the wall. Then he puts his fist, I put on my chest to pull out the bayonet. Meanwhile, the other Jap was given with 2 stabs in the stomach. I do not receive 5 stabs in the right arm. From around 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and thereafter, writhing in pain, he shouted for help. But no one was on the 2nd floor to assist him. In desperation, it proceeded midday downstairs, only to learn that it could not obtain any aid. However, henceforth he passed the night on a bed of mattresses in the passage between the common room and lavatories. It was not until the following morning that he dressed his wounds. Thinking that it was risky to stay on the 2nd floor, he transferred to the stationary room in the 3rd floor. And then the Japanese then bayoneted some brothers. And for example, here, Brother Victor and Brother Mutual William died soon after they were attacked. The people occupying the northeast side of the chapel were not spared from the Japanese atrocities. Okay, so I have already given some samples how the Japanese committed atrocities. Okay. Now on the afternoon of February 12, after indiscriminately killing and wounding all they could find in the building and stacking the lifeless bodies and the dying, the Japanese withdrew for the time being. Outside the building, the tormentors acted with nonchalance, rejoicing and drinking. Brother Barry FSC stated, the Japs, after slaughtering and heaping up the dead and the dying, began all to laugh. These troops entered from time to time to survey the situation. Father Cosgrave heard them laughing when the dying screamed, groaned, and cried. In the afternoon, a number of Japs were evidently eating and drinking and becoming very noisy within near the entrance in the boarders' dining room. The Japanese continued to perpetrate monstrous atrocities. As if they were not contented with what they had done earlier, they inspected such possible hiding places as cabinets and closets to put any survivor to death. The enemy forces divested the dead and the dying of their valuables and even stole the sacred vessel. Except for Fernando Vasquez Prada and Brother Antonius, who remained in the 1st and 3rd floors respectively, the survivors ventured out into the chapel. Sometime Monday night, February 12, Father Cosgrave regained consciousness and disengaged himself from the corpses that had fallen on him. The Redemptorist Superior was more than edified to see the patience and resignation with which these people met their death, some of them actually praying to God to forgive those who had put them to death. After giving absolution to the dying, he pulled himself upstairs into the chapel and inched his way towards the alleyway behind the altar. Physically depleted, he fell unconscious. On the night as well, Ramon Cojuangco got together his sister and servants. They found their way into the back of the altar where they came upon Father Cosgrave. They conceived the idea of absconding, but it came to naught. For given the presence of the Japanese sentries on the roof, any escape would have been dangerous. The group of Cojuangco spent the night in the upper sacristy, gospel side. On Tuesday morning, February 13, Father Cosgrave managed to crawl into the ground floor, and all apprehensive about the impending evil, he went ahead in providing spiritual comfort to the dying. That morning as well, President Yuchengco summoned up enough courage to escape, leaving behind her 2 daughters, for the Japanese were shooting the people seen around. Towards the close of the afternoon, Clarita, assisted by another maidservant, removed those still living in the wine cellar. With the steady advance of the Americans, the situation became highly charged. On the following day, Wednesday, February 14, some Japanese soldiers came and set the choir locked and the chapel entrance and certain materials in this area ablaze. This chapel, made of concrete, did not catch fire. Brother Hubert, although languishing, was able to put out the flames. Thus, when they returned, they started a fire anew and left again. Brother Hubert extinguished the flame once more, and he was caught by the time the Japanese came back and was stabbed again, or was stabbed dead. On that day, the building was still under heavy shelling. Later in the day, a gas bomb exploded in the chapel. Father Cosgrave covered the room with Shortly before the close of the afternoon, Clarita, Roldan, and others managed to move Rosario Carlos up the sacristy but decided to leave. Up to this time, most of those who survived the carnage were holed up in the narrow space behind the altar and inside the sacristy. Inasmuch as the Japanese had not left, they remained in their places without food and water. A few of them made do with unconsecrated hosts and water left in the flower vases. Those survivors were not spotted and molested by the Japanese, as if superstitious terror prevented those assassins from perpetrating their crime in front of him who was present in the host. Helpless as they were, they looked forward to their liberation from the enemy. Of freedom regained February 15. Those in the chapel were not aware of what was going on outside the main building. The battle was not yet over. The horrifying sound of engagement thundered near the LaSalle College. The American forces continued battering the enemy position. Sometime Thursday morning, February 15, the LaSalle and adjacent building Nippon Club were subjected to bombardment by battalions of howitzers. By noon, after enduring days of privation and pain, the survivors were finally liberated. The American soldiers prevailed over their enemies and the 12th Cavalry broke into the college. Checking over the situation, they saw for themselves the misfortune that befell the innocent civilians and the putrefied lifeless bodies strewn all over the place. When the liberating forces went into the chapel, the survivors at first were cautious in their movement, for they had yet to establish their identity. Brother Gonzalez and Reyes noted, entering the chapel, the soldiers looked over the scene. In the sacristy and behind the altar, the survivors were not sure of the identities of these new intruders. After